What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I'm Vulkan, and today we're going to talk about some of the things I've learned throughout my journey to Diablo 4 endgame. So a lot of kind of tips and tricks, mistakes to avoid, those type of things, because there's a lot of pitfalls that you can get caught up in that will waste a ton of gold, it'll waste time, it'll lead to some frustration. So I'm just going to share some tips with you guys to hopefully avoid some of those. But before we do, let's take a quick look at today's sponsor. Today's video sponsor is King Arthur Legends Rise. This is an upcoming squad RPG from Kabam, the creators of Shop Titans and Marvel Contest of Champions. In this new game, you'll be sent on a journey through a fantasy world based on the legend of King Arthur. In it, you'll explore a large world full of mythical creatures, be able to recruit and upgrade legendary heroes, each having their own backstory, skills, and abilities that can be used to tilt battles in your favor. You can even equip your heroes with powerful medieval weapons, relics, and gear to overcome the rising challenges the game will throw at you. The world of Camelot is no walk in the park. You'll battle against an array of terrifying monsters and crazed madmen in strategic and calculated combat. You'll progress through an interactive world and face off against epic bosses and mythical beasts, each more powerful and challenging than the last. And with each enemy defeated, you'll be able to hone your skills and become a master of the battlefield. King Arthur Legends Rise will be available on both mobile and PC, and be sure to pre-register for the game to receive some launch day rewards. If you want to learn more about the game, make sure to check out the links in the description below. So the first one I want to talk about is how to get gems back out of gear without paying a unsocket cost at the jeweler. So if you put a gem in a piece of gear, so like we have this chipped amethyst, we'll just drop it into this axe with a socket. So it's in there. If I were to go to the jeweler, it would cost roughly 18,000, 20,000 gold in order to unsocket this gem. However, if this is a piece of gear you no longer need, then you can just salvage it at the blacksmith. So if we go over to this guy, and let's click on our little salvage button here, and let's just salvage this axe. So when I did that, one, I get the materials I need, but you can see now I'm back up to 2 chipped amethyst. So you destroy the piece of gear that you no longer need, and you also get the gem back. So you don't necessarily have to go and unsocket it to save it before you dismantle or anything like that. Dismantling it will pull that gem out for you. So the next thing I want to talk about are legendary aspects at the occultist. This is a kind of a pitfall I see a lot of new players fall into. They're out playing the game, they get a piece of gear, a legendary piece of gear that has this legendary power on it, and it's a perfect roll. You can see here, this one, my Nature's Fury legendary power, it rolled an 8 out of the highest possible 8. So perfect roll. But let's say I get a pair of gloves that I like better. They're a better upgrade because, you know, you're leveling up, you get higher item power, all of that stuff. Naturally, you replace pieces of gear, and I really like this power. So what I want to do is I want to extract it. So I'll talk to the cultist. I'll go to extract. I'll put my piece of gear in there, and I'll extract the legendary aspect off the piece of gear. I'll destroy my legendary, I'll get the legendary power. Then I'll go over and I'll imprint it, let's say on this piece of gear. I'll go to my aspects and I'll go, you know what? Here's one I really like. Boom. I'm going to throw it on this piece of gear and go. So I see a lot of new players doing this, where they find this awesome piece of gear, they get a minor upgrade, they destroy the legendary to get the legendary aspect, and then they reapply it to this kind of medium upgrade piece of gear. And even when they're leveling, so before they even finish the story or get to end game, they've already sort of wasted this because you replace gear so quickly early on. And the issue with this is when you imprint a piece of gear with an aspect, you can see that the legendary power, like here on my two-handed mace, is imprinted. So you can see here my core skills deal up to 76% damage. That's a very good roll. And it's imprinted, which means I cannot take that legendary power and put it onto a new piece of gear. Once you pull something out into an aspect and you use this aspect to turn a yellow piece of gear into a legendary, then you can no longer use that. You can no longer extract it and move it to somewhere else. You can only do that one time. And because of that, you don't want to waste those aspects on low level pieces of gear or pieces of gear that aren't perfect for your build. As you get deeper and deeper into endgame and you start getting less and less in terms of large upgrades, then you can start really looking at, how do I want to spend these aspects? Is this going to get me to the next world tier and let me beat my capstone dungeon? Is this going to boost my build and make it even better or even more viable? So these are all things to consider when you're really looking at legendary aspects. Because again, just kind of wrap up and summarize, I see a lot of new players taking a legendary power off of a piece of gear and then throwing it onto another piece of gear at like level 37. And it's a perfect roll. And not knowing, unknowingly, they just wasted that legendary aspect, because here in 3 levels, that piece of legendary gear is going to be worthless. So that's something to avoid. If you get these legendary aspects that roll perfect, just hang on to them. Literally, just hang on to them. Go into end game, get to a point where you can really kind of take advantage of these things, and then throw them onto the gear that you need. And continuing with the aspect conversation, so this is something kind of just like a tip. If you're looking for an aspect, you don't have to go out to an external website or anything like that. You can actually just open up your Codex of Power, and then from here, find the aspect you want. So like, let's say show my class only. Let's say I really want this retribution aspect. There's a pin on map, so you just left click it. It pins it to your map. Now if I go out, I can see I have this nice little path that takes me all the way to my undiscovered area that has this aspect. So again, you don't have to go out and search for these things. It's built into the game. You just have to go into your codex and actually pick the one that you want to try to track down. And sticking with our legendary talk, let's talk about another thing. As you're leveling up, don't try to fight what the game gives you. Early on, you're not really going to have a lot of difficulty in the game. Yes, there's probably gonna be times where you die. There's probably gonna be times where, you know, you run somewhere you're not supposed to and all of that fun stuff. Or maybe you're not going as quickly as you want to, and that's perfectly fine. But the game is going to give you legendaries. And these legendaries, you wanna make sure that you don't just throw them in the trash and not take advantage of them. For instance, early on my druid, I got a lot of like pulverized legendaries, things like that. So I was actually running a pulverized build for a little while. Then I started to get legendaries that really benefited a landslide build. So respecking is incredibly cheap. So I respec'd into a landslide build and I started using that. And it made my journey from 1 to 50 much, much easier. You don't have to go and try to, you know, fight the system and go, you know what, I'm getting all these legendaries for pulverize. I'm just not going to use it. And I'm going to stick with these like subpar yellows and blues or whatever. And I'm just going to try to like force my way through the game because I don't like a specific playstyle. And I know that might not be what everybody wants to hear. And I don't want to try to say, you know, you shouldn't play the way you want to play. Obviously, do whatever's fun for you. But I'm saying if the game's giving you a bunch of legendaries or gear trending towards one skill or one direction, then just go with it. Who knows? You might really like it. So we have 3 more things to talk about. The next one I want to touch on is, should you salvage or should you sell? So early on in the game, you might feel like you're pretty gold starved, especially if you're going and you're respecking, if you're upgrading things, if you're interacting with the vendors a lot. You're going to have that kind of situation where you're like, man, I just don't have enough gold, or I feel like I'm always out of gold. Don't worry. Don't worry about that. When you get to end game, you're going to get gold like crazy. So don't feel like you have to like stockpile or anything early on. What you want to do is you want to break down all of your stuff at the blacksmith. So don't sell anything. Go here and just salvage everything. You want to salvage stuff because you're going to get these materials that are going to be incredibly useful. So if you click on materials and you click on your little saddlebag here, you can see like, here's all my plants. Here's like ore. So I have a bunch of that. Skins, monster parts, salvage stuff. So you have all of these things that come from salvaging pieces of gear, and these are incredibly useful. They're used for upgrading things. So if I go and I upgrade, let's just say this yellow piece of gear, it's going to cost rawhide, and then it's going to cost rawhide and superior leather, and then it's going to cost veiled crystals, and so on and so forth. And same thing with legendaries. So if I go and I upgrade my legendary boots, you can see all the way up to veiled crystals, and then eventually they start taking these like very rare stuff like coiling wards and all of that. But still, it's the same thing. As you go and you salvage legendary gear, you salvage rare gear, you salvage magical gear, you're going to get all of these different kind of materials, and these are going to pay dividends in end game. So while you might feel like you're gold starved now, just know you're investing in yourself. That way when you get to end game and you get a piece of gear you really like, you'll be able to upgrade it without having to feel like you don't have any materials or you're very short on materials. Now, with all of that being said, if you are like completely out of gold and you need something, then sure. I mean, feel free to sell like a couple yellows or maybe a legendary or whatever to give yourself what you need. But I say don't feel like you have to. The next thing I want to talk about are elixirs. So if you go and you talk to the herbalist, which is this little mortar and pestle here, the alchemist rather, it has this little mortar pestle, you can create elixirs. And these elixirs are in your consumables tab in your inventory. They do crazy stuff. You can have like overpower damage, you can have fire resist, attack speed, lucky hit chance, increased damage against certain enemy types, and that's all fine and dandy. That's great, especially as you're leveling. I mean, anything's better. But the big thing is the experience gained by 5% for 30 minutes. You might not think 5% is a lot, but if you spread that out across the entire story, the entire campaign, 5% adds up. And that's a lot of experience left on the table by literally just not having an elixir going. You don't have to do anything extra. These things are incredibly cheap to make. They don't take a lot of resources. You should be collecting these either through salvaging or as you're moving about. You can collect like your plants and stuff. These should be something you're always gathering. And if you do, then you can make elixirs and just keep one up and running all the time. It helps. It really does. So especially if you want to level quick, make sure you have these things going. And I mean, bonus points if you can get one that actually like matches. So like my druid was a big overpower guy for a long time. So having these crushing elixirs, fantastic. Experience plus more damage. I'll take that every day of the week. The last thing I want to talk about is Altars of Lilith. Now, this is something that I learned a very long time ago in a multitude of other games where you have all these collectible things, and you really want to make sure you get all of these. So Altars of Lilith are the exact same thing. So out here, I'm on Map Genie. I've talked about this in my previous video, but Map Genie allows you to find your altars, click them, and then check this little found box to make them transparent. Please, as you're going through this is going to save you guys a lot of time and frustration. Mark these off as you find them. If you want to take an afternoon and run through and find all of the altars, that's great. If you're somebody that just kind of picks them up as you go, also good. But make sure you mark these things off, because you don't want to get to the point where you're looking for one altar of Lilith in an entire zone and you have to go visit each one of these to figure out, is that the one that I missed? So as you go, just come out here, mark them off. I know it's an extra couple clicks. It's annoying because it pulls you out of the game, but it's going to save you a lot of time and a lot of mental energy. So make sure you do that. And there's a ton on the map, as you can see. So just go through and mark them off. So guys, those are all the tips and tricks that I've sort of kind of put together through my time with Diablo 4 so far. It's been incredibly fun, and I appreciate all of you guys. The super kind words, the nice comments, all of that stuff has been very helpful, super supportive. And as always, I really appreciate everybody that watches my content. This has been Vulkan, and I'll talk to you guys next time.